The evening air hung thick over the Mississippi Delta, still trembling from the echoes of war. Willowbend, once a proud plantation estate surrounded by sweeping fields of cotton, now stood as a fragile relic, its columns cracked, its windows dim, its silence unsettling. When Colonel Abraham Holt returned home in the final days of 1865, the house seemed to shrink beneath the weight of his presence. He arrived at dusk, riding a horse so gaunt it looked ghost-born, its ribs sharp beneath patches of dried mud. The colonel's posture remained impeccable, but something in his gaze felt fractured. His eyes lingered too long on the shadows, flinched at sudden movement, and scanned the property as if searching for an enemy no one else could see. The few remaining staff exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to greet him or brace themselves. Eleanor Holt watched from the veranda, her hands clasped tightly in front of her waist. She wore a calm expression, delicate, trained, and deceptive. Inside, her stomach twisted. The man approaching her was her husband, yes, but also not. War had carved away more than flesh. What returned felt half-made, half-haunted. "Eleanor," he greeted, touching the brim of his hat but not offering a smile. "Abraham," she replied softly, afraid her voice might break. Their daughter Clara, 18 and sharp-eyed, remained inside, peering through the lace curtains. She felt the shift before anyone else, the temperature of the house falling, the dread crawling up the hallway like an unwelcome guest. Clara had always been intuitive, sensitive to every tremor in her parents' marriage. This tremor felt different, dangerous. Behind the colonel rode Isaiah Turner, a once enslaved man who had chosen, out of necessity more than loyalty, to remain at Willowbend even after emancipation. His presence was as steady as the earth beneath the great willow trees out back, trees that had witnessed every secret the Holt family tried so hard to bury. Isaiah slid down from his saddle and offered Clara a subtle nod through the window. She returned it, a gesture of quiet trust in a household where trust had become a rare and fragile thing. Inside, the colonel removed his gloves with slow, deliberate movements. The silence between him and his wife stretched thin. "How have things been kept?" he asked. "As best as they could," Eleanor answered. "Given the circumstances." His jaw tightened. "We'll restore it, all of it, starting tonight." Clara entered the room as he said this, her face composed but her eyes full of questions. "Father." He looked at her, really looked, but instead of warmth, Clara felt something like scrutiny, as if he were assessing a stranger standing in his parlor. She forced a smile anyway. Dinner was a strained affair. The colonel spoke little, eating with mechanical precision. Eleanor attempted soft conversation, mentioning neighbors and supply shortages, but Abraham offered only curt nods. Clara remained quiet, studying him. More than once she caught him glancing toward the back windows, toward the willow grove. After supper, when the household settled into uneasy quiet, the colonel slipped out the rear door. No lantern, no explanation. Clara waited until the floorboards stilled before following at a distance. Night had fully claimed the property, draping it in humid darkness. The willow trees swayed gently, their long tendrils brushing the ground like fingers stroking the earth. Clara kept close to the shadows, her breath shallow as she crept closer. She saw him then, kneeling beside the largest willow, his hands buried in the soil. The moon cast silvery light on his form as he dug with frantic, almost reverent movements. Something lay beside him, a small burlap-wrapped bundle, stained and heavy. Clara's heart struck her ribs. Whatever her father had brought home from the war, it wasn't just trauma. She took a single step backward, and a twig snapped beneath her heel. The colonel's head jerked up. His eyes scanned the darkness, sharp and feral. Clara pressed herself against the tree trunk, barely breathing. After a long, trembling moment, he returned to his digging. When he finally buried the bundle beneath the curling roots, he whispered something Clara couldn't hear, words shaped like a vow or a warning. As he walked back toward the house, Clara remained under the willow, staring at the fresh mound of earth. Something inside her shifted, a quiet dread blooming in her chest. Because whatever her father had buried that night, it didn't feel like the last time he would come back to it. Morning crept into Willowbend with a hesitant light, as if the sun itself were unsure whether it should disturb the fragile quiet inside the house. Eleanor woke early, her sleep broken by the memory of Abraham's distant footsteps moving through the halls in the middle of the night. She had not asked where he'd gone. She didn't dare. In the kitchen, the air smelled of chicory coffee and wood smoke. Isaiah was already working, his movements practiced and mindful, careful not to make noise that might draw the colonel's attention. Since Abraham's return, even the old boards seemed to hold their breath. Clara entered the room wearing an expression that Isaiah recognized instantly, fear disguised as determination. "You didn't sleep," he murmured without looking up. She hesitated. "Neither did you." Isaiah stopped slicing bread. His eyes lifted to hers with a knowing gravity. "You saw something last night, didn't you?" Clara swallowed hard. "I'm not sure what I saw." He didn't push, not yet, but the crease between his brows deepened. In all his years on the property, he had never known the colonel to bury anything himself. That alone spoke volumes. Upstairs, Abraham Holt, dressed in silence. The uniform no longer hung in his closet. Eleanor had insisted on putting it away, but the war clung to him like an invisible garment. He inspected himself in the mirror, the morning light revealing the hollows beneath his eyes and the hard set of his mouth. His reflection felt unfamiliar, untrustworthy. At breakfast, he announced the first of his new rules. "We're restoring order in this house," he said, voice cold as spent ash. "No wandering the grounds after sundown. No visitors until I deem the house presentable, and no one goes near the willow grove, understood?" Clara felt her pulse jump. Eleanor gave a small, nervous nod. Isaiah stood at the sideboard, hands clasped behind his back, saying nothing. The colonel's eyes landed on him. "I expect you to enforce this." "I hear you, sir," Isaiah replied. But the colonel's gaze lingered, as if suspicious of something unspoken. After breakfast, Eleanor attempted to resume normalcy, dusting shelves, arranging flowers that wilted too quickly in the humid air, writing letters to neighbors who might never reply. But nothing settled the unease. Abraham's presence hung over everything like a storm cloud refusing to break. Clara retreated to the library, her sanctuary, though even the book seemed uncomfortable today. She stared at the window overlooking the willow grove. The fresh mound of earth was not visible from this angle, but she felt its weight regardless. Her mother found her there, sitting stiffly in a chair. "You're trembling," Eleanor said gently. Clara stiffened. "It's just cold." But the Mississippi heat contradicted her. Eleanor sat beside her. "Your father, he's changed. The war took so much out of him." Clara shook her head slowly. "It gave something back to him too. Something I don't understand." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the armrest. She knew what her daughter meant. She had seen glimpses of it herself, moments when Abraham's eyes went dark, when his breath grew shallow, when he seemed to be listening to something no one else could hear. Outside, the day wore on with the sluggish pace of late summer. Isaiah worked near the stables, repairing tools, but his gaze shifted often to the willow grove. The colonel's command to avoid it only deepened his concern. Secrets buried in the soil never stayed quiet for long. Near midday, Abraham disappeared again. Isaiah noticed first. He followed quietly, keeping distance, using the thickets and trees as cover. The colonel moved with eerie purpose, his boots sinking into the soft ground after last night's digging. He stopped at the same tree where he had knelt before. The soil was still loose, darkened by moisture. Abraham crouched, placed a hand on the fresh earth, and whispered something, words carried by the wind in broken fragments. Isaiah stepped closer, careful. The colonel's voice sharpened, carrying a name. "Samuel." Isaiah froze. Samuel Reddick, a Union soldier who had gone missing near the end of the war. Rumors had whispered about him for months. Some said he deserted, others that he was captured, others that he died unclaimed. Isaiah remembered him. A quiet young man with a strange bond to the colonel, though no one dared speak of it openly. Isaiah's breath steadied, his heartbeat slow and heavy. He had suspected something dark in the colonel's past, but Samuel's name made everything far more dangerous. He stepped back carefully. A twig snapped beneath his heel. The colonel's head shot up. Those war-scarred eyes scanned the woods, sharp, alert, almost feral. Isaiah remained perfectly still, hidden between the shadows. Slowly, painfully slowly, Abraham rose from the earth. The wind shifted, and in that brief moment, Isaiah realized the colonel wasn't just guarding a secret. He was protecting it, with the kind of devotion a man reserves for something he fears will destroy him if ever exposed. The afternoon heat thickened over Willowbend until the air felt syrup-heavy, pressing against the skin, smothering movement and thought. By late day, even the cicadas seemed strained by it, their droning calls echoing through the willow grove like a warning no one wished to interpret. Clara found Isaiah near the water pump, fixing a bent handle. She waited until no one was within earshot before speaking. "You were near the grove today," she said quietly. Isaiah didn't look up. "And you were there last night." Clara's breath caught. She hadn't realized he knew. "What did you see?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "I don't know. My father was burying something, wrapped in burlap. I thought—" Her voice broke. "Isaiah," it looked heavy. He finally raised his eyes to hers. "There's talk about a Union soldier missing since the end of the war, Samuel Reddick." Clara blinked. "I don't understand what that has to do with father." Isaiah didn't answer. Instead, he glanced toward the house, toward the shadow of a man whose temper hovered close to breaking. Inside, the atmosphere sharpened with tension. Eleanor paced her bedroom, unfolding and refolding letters from neighbors. Each letter felt colder than the last, laced with pointed references to debt, to the new social order, to rumors quietly spreading about the colonel's unsettled mind. It hurt her more than she admitted. When she descended the stairs at dusk, she found Abraham in the parlor, staring at the wall as though it were a battlefield map. He didn't acknowledge her presence. "You went out again," she said carefully. His jaw tightened. "I walk my own land." "You've always walked it," she replied gently, "but never with such fixation." He snapped his eyes toward her. "The grove stays untouched. Do you hear me, Eleanor?" She flinched at the sharpness. "I only asked. I won't have you or Clara meddling. I won't have Isaiah prowling around it either." Eleanor's fingers curled against her skirt. "You're frightening your own family." Abraham rose from his chair with a steadiness that felt rehearsed, controlled. "Family obeys. That is how a house stands." Before Eleanor could answer, Clara appeared at the doorway, her expression pale but resolute. "Mother, the candles outside need replacing," she said quickly, clearly attempting to pull Eleanor away from the bursting tension. Eleanor understood the lifeline offered. She stepped back from her husband, leaving the parlor just as Abraham's gaze shifted toward Clara, cold, unreadable, calculating. When the women reached the back of the house, Clara released a shaky breath. "He's unraveling," Eleanor whispered, "and I can't reach him." Clara took her mother's hands. "We need to understand what he buried." Eleanor recoiled. "No, absolutely not. That place, whatever it is to him, it has a hold on him. I won't put you in its path." But Clara's eyes, fierce and determined, betrayed that she had already made a choice. Night crept over the land with solemn weight. The willow grove rustled in the dark, its branches whispering secrets in the thick air. Isaiah waited near the stables, tension braced in his shoulders. When Clara joined him, lantern in hand, he looked at her for a long moment. "You're certain?" he asked. "I need to know," she answered. "I think it's the only way to protect him. And us." Isaiah nodded. "Then we go together." The grove felt different at night, colder despite the humidity. The air carried a damp smell, like soil freshly turned. Clara held the lantern close as they approached the willow's great bulk, its branches trailing like ribbons of shadow. The mound was still there. Clara knelt beside it, her heartbeat uneven. Isaiah watched the tree line, alert. Clara brushed her fingers over the loose soil. "Isaiah," he whispered a name. "Did you hear it clearly today?" "Yes," he said. "Samuel." Clara's breath trembled. Was Samuel close to him? During the war? Isaiah hesitated, closer than anyone realized. Clara lifted her eyes slowly. What do you mean? He looked down at the mound, then back at Clara, a silent acknowledgement of a bond that had gone unspoken for a reason. She swallowed, understanding dawning like a chill. You think my father loved him? Isaiah didn't answer outright, but the weight of his silence spoke more honestly than any words could. As Clara opened her mouth again, a distant creak split the air. Isaiah turned sharply. A lantern flickered between the trees, one not belonging to them. Clara's pulse surged. A figure moved in the darkness, slow and deliberate, making its way toward the grove. The shape was unmistakable. Broad shoulders, dragged footsteps, a familiar limp. The Colonel. Isaiah grabbed Clara's arm. We need to move now. They slipped behind the outer trees as Abraham entered the clearing, lantern held low. His face was ghostly in the light, his eyes fixed on the freshly turned soil as though it were speaking to him. Clara watched her father kneel, watched the trembling in his hands, watched him lean close to the earth as if listening for a heartbeat beneath it. And for a moment his expression softened. Tender, broken. Then his head jerked up, eyes scanning the grove. Something, instinct or intuition, had told him he was not alone. Clara held her breath as branches swayed above them, whispering like a warning, and the Colonel rose slowly to his feet, turning toward the shadows where she and Isaiah hid. The Colonel's lantern cast a dim, trembling glow across the grove as he stepped closer to the shadows. Clara could feel her heartbeat in her throat, loud enough that she feared it might betray her hiding place. Isaiah held her arm steady, his breath barely stirring the humid air. Abraham Holt paused only a few steps from where they concealed themselves. His eyes narrowed, scanning the darkness with the alertness of a hunted animal. For a moment, neither Clara nor Isaiah dared to breathe. Then, a whisper. Not from the Colonel. From the willow branches above, where the night wind skimmed through the leaves with a soft hiss. Abraham stiffened, turning sharply toward the sound. It gave Clara and Isaiah the briefest window to slip deeper into the trees, moving as quietly as shadows retreating from dawn. They didn't stop until they reached the edge of the grove, lungs burning, hands shaking. Clara looked back once more. The Colonel stood alone, lantern lifted, staring at the mound of earth as though it threatened to rise beneath him. Isaiah touched her shoulder. Let's get you inside. But Clara didn't sleep that night. She lay awake replaying her father's expression, the tenderness that had passed over him, the fracture in his voice when he whispered Samuel's name. Whatever her father buried was not just a secret. It was someone he had once loved. And love, Clara realized, could make monsters of men when it was forbidden. The next morning dawned thick and gray, as though a storm lingered just beyond the horizon. Eleanor moved through the house with nervous energy, her face pale and her hands cold. She found Abraham in his study, the curtains drawn tight. He was reading a stack of letters, or rather staring through them. Abraham, she began softly. Clara told me she heard you outside again last night. He didn't respond. Eleanor stepped closer. The neighbors are asking questions. They say they've seen you wandering at all hours. They say you speak to someone who isn't there. Abraham lifted his head abruptly, eyes flashing. Let them talk. Your reputation is mine to manage, he snapped. Eleanor recoiled, her breath catching. For a moment she saw something wild in him, something desperate. He stood abruptly. I won't be judged in my own home, not by them, not by you. She steadied herself. Abraham, what happened in the war? What happened with Samuel Reddick? A long silence filled the room. A silence so dense it felt alive. Finally, Abraham spoke, his voice low. There are loyalties you cannot understand. Eleanor's stomach tightened. It wasn't a denial. He stepped past her, leaving the study without another word. When the door closed, she sank onto the settee, hands trembling as she picked up one of the fallen letters. It wasn't from a neighbor. It wasn't even addressed to her. It was addressed to Abraham, and it bore the signature of Samuel Reddick. Isaiah was repairing a fence post when Clara approached him with a folded piece of paper. Her hands shook. My mother found this, she said. It's one of Samuel's letters. Isaiah opened it cautiously. The handwriting was rushed but intimate. The words spoke of danger, of fear, of devotion that crossed lines neither man was permitted to acknowledge. And at the bottom, "If the worst happens, bury me where the willow touches the river. You promised. And your promises, you always keep." Isaiah closed his eyes. "Clara, this is what your father's guarding." She sat heavily on a stump, staring at the earth. He loved Samuel. And he lost him. "That kind of loss can undo a man," Isaiah said softly. "But it doesn't excuse what he's become." Clara's voice trembled. Do you think Samuel is what he buried there?" Isaiah didn't answer immediately. "I think part of him is," he finally said. "Enough to keep your father tethered to that grove." Clara felt a chill run through her. He's not going to let anyone take that away from him. "No," Isaiah murmured. "He's not." A distant slam echoed from the house. They looked up sharply. Eleanor stood at the veranda, one hand pressed against the railing, her face stark with fear. "Clara," she called out, voice breaking. "You need to come inside. Now." Clara and Isaiah hurried toward her. Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. "Your father has locked himself in the cellar. He took the lanterns with him. And he's muttering." "Muttering what?" Clara asked, her breath tightening. Eleanor swallowed. Samuel's name. But before Clara could speak, another sound crept up from the depths of the house. A low, guttural cry, a sound of grief, or warning. Isaiah stepped forward. "He's not alone down there." Clara turned toward the cellar door, dread curling up her spine like smoke. Because in that muffled cry, she thought she heard a second voice. The cellar door loomed at the bottom of the staircase like the entrance to an abandoned mine. Dark, humid, and pulsing faintly with the muffled cries rising from below. Clara felt her mother trembling beside her. Isaiah stood a step ahead, jaw locked, eyes scanning for danger. "Stay behind me," he whispered. Eleanor shook her head. "He's my husband." "He's not himself," Isaiah replied. "Not anymore." Clara tightened her grip on the handrail as Isaiah lifted the iron latch. It gave with a reluctant, screeching groan. The darkness beneath seemed to breathe. The air that rose up from the cellar was chilled, smelling of earth, sweat, and something older. Fear soaked into stone. Isaiah struck a match, lighting a single lantern that cast warped shadows across the narrow passage. "Abraham?" Eleanor called softly. A pause. Then a voice answered, but not the voice she knew. It was hoarse, trembling with exhaustion and devotion, shaped by memory rather than the present. "He's waiting," the colonel murmured. "He's calling." Clara felt the words settle over her skin like frost. They descended slowly, the wooden steps creaking under their weight. At the bottom, the lantern revealed Abraham Holt kneeling in the center of the cellar floor. The lantern he'd brought with him flickered weakly beside him. In his hands he held something, cloth, old and fraying, wrapped around what looked like dried dirt. A relic, a keepsake, a burden. "Abraham," Eleanor whispered, stepping forward. He lifted his head, and for the briefest instant Clara saw the man he had once been, proud, disciplined, unbreakable. But the next breath shattered the illusion. His eyes were red-rimmed, frantic, and shining with a grief so deep it bordered on madness. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. "I told you all to stay away." Clara stepped around her mother. "Father, what have you done?" His hands tightened around the cloth bundle. "I kept my promise. I buried him where the willow touches the river. He asked me to. He trusted me." Eleanor's breath hitched. "Samuel?" Abraham winced at the name as though struck. "He was mine," he whispered. "And I failed him." Silence wrapped around them like a shroud. Clara felt her throat close. She had suspected love. Now she saw devotion. A devotion so powerful it had sunk its roots deep into her father's sanity. Isaiah moved closer, calm but firm. "Colonel, you need to come upstairs. Clara and Miss Eleanor, they're worried for you." Abraham's eyes sharpened. Suspicion flickered. "You were in the grove." Isaiah didn't deny it. "Yes." The colonel rose slowly, the lantern light glinting off the sheen of sweat on his brow. He stood unsteadily. You trespassed on sacred ground. Clara stepped protectively in front of Isaiah. Father, we only want to understand. There is nothing for you to understand, Abraham snapped. You cannot know what he meant to me, what I promised him, what I owe. His voice cracked on the last word. Oh, revealing a fractured soul barely holding itself together. Eleanor reached for him with trembling hands. Abraham, please, let it go. He staggered back from her touch as though burned. I can't. Without him, I am nothing. Without his memory, I am dust. Clara's heart broke at the sight. This towering man reduced to fragments of grief and guilt. Isaiah stepped forward again. Colonel, listen to me. Whatever happened, it's over. But you have people still living who need you. Abraham's expression shifted. Rage, sorrow, desperation cycling through him like a storm. Then, from somewhere deep in his chest, a sound escaped. A low, shuddering breath. His knees buckled. The cloth bundle slipped from his fingers, collapsing onto the dirt floor. He sank to the ground, head bowed, shoulders shaking. Clara reached him first. She placed a hand on his back, feeling the tremor of a man finally breaking beneath the weight he'd carried alone. Eleanor knelt beside her daughter, tears streaming silently. Isaiah extinguished the second lantern and set it aside. Let's take him upstairs. Together they lifted the colonel, guiding him away from the cellar and the darkness that had claimed so much of him. When they emerged into the faint morning light, the house felt different, still heavy, still wounded, but somehow breathing again. In the days that followed, Abraham Holt remained withdrawn, rarely speaking. He never returned to the Willow Grove, nor did Clara or Eleanor. But Isaiah, on a quiet evening, walked to the river bank beneath the willow's sweeping branches. He stood over the place where the earth had been disturbed one last time, bowed his head, and whispered a prayer for a man who had loved beyond the limits allowed to him, and for the family who would forever live in the shadow of that love. Because some legacies are not carved in stone, but buried in the soil, waiting to be uncovered by those brave enough to face them. If this story moved you, leave a comment telling us what surprised you the most about the fate of the Holt family. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it so more people can discover these hidden stories from America's past.